It was a week of astonishing disclosures and remarkable royal updates, a truly extraordinary period in the ongoing saga of the British monarchy. And here at the Royalist, we are absolutely thrilled to have you with us for this breakdown. The core of today's discussion, a situation that has sent shockwaves through royal circles and captured the intense curiosity of the public, concerns Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. There are persistent and seemingly credible reports suggesting that Meghan, who not so long ago denounced the United Kingdom and the royal family in terms that many found deeply offensive, labeling the institution racist, cruel, and inherently hateful, is now apparently planning a return to these very shores in just over 2 weeks' time. This isn't just any casual visit. The reports indicate she will be accompanied by her children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, and most extraordinarily, that they will be staying in a royal palace, accommodation allegedly provided by King Charles himself. This potential development, full of contradictions and unanswered questions, is precisely what we will be dissecting today, and we are incredibly fortunate to have the legendary Tom Bower, the celebrated biographer and author of such explosive and meticulously researched books as Revenge and Betrayal, joining us later to sort the intricate facts from the convenient fiction and the inescapable PR spin that invariably surrounds the Sussexes. Before we delve deeper into that looming royal showdown, however, we have a packed rundown of other significant royal news that has unfolded this week. This is a broadcast you certainly won't want to miss, filled with analysis and insider perspectives that you simply won't find anywhere else. And if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button to stay completely up to date with all our exclusive royal coverage. We've been witnessing what can only be described as a dueling Father's Day photo war, with different royal households releasing distinct images, each carrying a subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, different message, which we'll analyze with Paula Frolic in a landmark move for the modern monarchy. King Charles has become the first sovereign in recent history to publicly disclose his personal tax bill, a step heavily managed by the palace, but one that raises intriguing questions about transparency versus privacy, especially when considering recent findings regarding other family members' financial arrangements. And we must also address the Daily Mail's seemingly bizarre and relentless vendetta against Prince William, as they have launched yet another baffling attack on the Prince of Wales, resurrecting the tiresome worksheet narrative, a criticism that seems particularly ill-judged given the incredibly challenging year he and his family have faced. So without further ado, let's get straight into today's first essential item, our comprehensive royal news update, starting with the King's unprecedented tax bill disclosures and the contrasting fortunes and criticisms facing Prince William. Every year, without fail, the royal family publishes their detailed accounts, typically timed to coincide with the end of a very public week of formal ceremonial and social occasions, Trooping the Color, the Garter Day service, and of course, Royal Ascot. This period is traditionally seen as the time when the monarchy sets its own agenda, showcasing its grandeur and dutiful public service before, in decades past, the Queen would retreat for a lengthier summer break, sometimes lasting 4 months, which I must say, even by the most relaxed European standards, is a rather substantial holiday. While that specific long holiday pattern has been scaled back, a similar rhythm still exists today, with the publication of the sovereign grant and associated royal accounts expected in the coming week or so. What has emerged over this weekend, carefully flagged to the press ahead of the formal release, is that King Charles is set to become the first British monarch in modern times to publicly disclose his personal tax bill. Now, as with many such announcements from the palace, this is slightly less revolutionary than it might initially appear. As Prince Charles, he always made a point of disclosing his tax arrangements, so in one sense, this is merely a continuation of his established personal practice as sovereign. It would have perhaps seemed quite conspicuous, even slightly odd, had he suddenly declared upon his accession, "Well, now that I am king, I will no longer share any information whatsoever." Nevertheless, this disclosure does matter significantly in principle. Under British law, the monarch is actually legally exempt from paying income tax, capital gains tax, and most importantly, inheritance tax. In effect, They are under no legal obligation to pay any tax at all, nor are they required to publicly disclose details of their substantial private income. However, since 1993, the late Queen Elizabeth II agreed to voluntarily pay income tax and capital gains tax on her personal income. This landmark agreement was reached amidst significant public and political pressure, notably after public funds were utilized for the extensive and costly restoration of Windsor Castle following the devastating fire there in 1992. Since then, the monarch has paid these taxes as what has often been described as a goodwill gesture to the broader public, or, as some might more cynically put it, to us peasants. The crucial detail, however, is that while the payment has been voluntary and ongoing, the specific figures of how much the monarch actually pays have never been made public, until this promised move by King Charles. This coming disclosure will cover the tax the king paid for the 2024-2025 financial year, specifically relating to his personal income derived from the Duchy of Lancaster, a vast portfolio of land, property, and assets held in trust for the sovereign, which generated around £24 million last year, or roughly $30 million, as well as income from his other personal investments and private estates. The palace is predictably and quite obviously presenting this move as definitive proof of the king's unwavering commitment to transparency and modernization. And sure, credit where credit is due. Any move towards greater openness from an institution as historically secretive as the monarchy should be acknowledged as a positive step. However, the accompanying narrative that the royal family is now incredibly transparent, a claim often amplified by certain sections of the media, requires much closer and more critical examination. Just last week, we saw the National Audit Office raise a series of eyebrows with their findings, pointing out rather pointedly not only that Prince Andrew has continued to sublet cottages on the Royal Lodge estate while seemingly paying no rent himself, but also that Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie have been living in properties within St. James's Palace and Kensington Palace, respectively, with their rent reportedly paid for by the king for some 20 years. Furthermore, the report revealed that Prince Edward, who has largely managed to avoid significant public scrutiny regarding his finances thus far, also benefits from a highly advantageous property arrangement. So, while King Charles's voluntary tax publication is undoubtedly better than continued secrecy, there remains a very long way to go before we achieve anything resembling proper institutional transparency. And achieving that transparency is a cause that campaigners like Andrew Loney and Norman Baker have championed with determination for decades. I have to say, their recent campaign, despite their tireless efforts, has somewhat stalled, hitting a brick wall of deeply entrenched institutional resistance from within the palace structure. Norman Baker, in particular, is an interesting figure to consider in this broader context right now, as he had a powerful piece published in the Daily Mail over the weekend, branding the heir to the throne, Workshe William. This is, of course, a charge and a moniker we have heard directed at William before, usually during quiet news periods or when certain publications decide to reignite old criticisms. This recurring accusation of being work-shy stems from a rigid numbers-only comparison that often fails to account for modern realities, pointing out that Prince William completed just 57 official royal engagements in the first 5.5 months of this year, compared to King Charles's 76 and Princess Anne's impressive total of 100. Now, we have been here before, and I have discussed this specific dynamic on several occasions, because I believe it is fundamentally incorrect to misrepresent William as incredibly lazy, simply because he refuses to engage in the kind of competitive presentism that defined previous generations of royals. What I actually find far more fascinating than the raw statistics themselves is what this predictable narrative reveals about the Daily Mail's complex and often shifting relationship with the palace press offices. Let me be perfectly clear, Norman Baker is completely beyond reproach in his integrity, having dedicated a huge portion of his life to campaigning for royal financial transparency, so this is not a criticism of him at all, as he would naturally seek to have his research published wherever he could secure the widest possible audience. The Mail is undoubtedly a great place for him to reach that audience, But the publication itself seems to harbor a specific agenda regarding William that manifests with remarkable regularity every single summer. We see it year after year, these beautifully timed critical reports questioning where the Wales family is on holiday, whether they are on a luxury yacht, how much money he is making from the running of the Duchy of Cornwall, and the persistent claim that he is simply not doing enough. I find it genuinely baffling, and in many senses highly questionable, for the Mail to keep pushing this specific angle against the Prince of Wales, particularly during a year when his wife has been navigating an incredibly difficult journey through cancer treatment, and while they are actively raising 3 very young children. To run pieces branding a man work-shy under those deeply challenging personal circumstances is a very odd editorial choice. But to understand why they keep running these pieces, we have to look closely at the historic alignments within the British press. Let's be entirely honest, the Mail has traditionally maintained a very close, mutually beneficial relationship with the King's office, and the Mail on Sunday in particular was always seen as being exceptionally close to Queen Camilla during the long years of her public rehabilitation. Furthermore, it is a matter of public record that the King's current press office is run by a former senior executive from the Mail, creating a natural conduit for communication, which makes this confrontational relationship with William all the more intriguing. It speaks very directly to the precise internal dynamics that Prince Harry described so vividly in his autobiography Spare, where he detailed how different households within the royal family would routinely brief the press against one another to ensure that when one member's reputation was down, the other was up. Now, I do not believe this specific example is a case of direct malicious briefing from the palace against William, but it does reflect a wider media strategy where William is treated with far less deference because he is much less willing to play the traditional, transactional game of trading personal access for favorable coverage. William is notoriously protective of his family's privacy, refusing to provide the cozy briefings and regular media access that the British press has grown to expect over the decades, choosing instead not to feed the media beast in quite the same way his father's household historically did. This creates an editorial friction that is well worth keeping an eye on as we move through the summer months, because watching whether the Mail continues to attack William while simultaneously running highly sympathetic, glowing stories about the King will tell you a fair old bit about exactly which direction the editorial wind is blowing behind the palace walls. This fascinating media positioning brings us neatly to our next segment, Time for Tea with Tom, where I am delighted to be joined by my old friend and seasoned royal commentator Paula Frolic to dissect what can only be described as the Father's Day photograph war. This year, the annual celebration turned into a subtle battle of imagery among 3 distinct royal households, releasing 3 very different photographs, sending 3 entirely distinct messages to the public, while leaving 2 very major father figures completely unmentioned. King Charles chose to share a deeply nostalgic, touching picture of himself as a young man with his own father, Prince Philip, offering a lovely public wish to everyone who couldn't be with their fathers, a sentiment that many royal watchers suspected was a quiet, coded nod toward his ongoing estrangement from Harry. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic in Montecito, Meghan Markle released a stylized image of Harry, accompanied by a caption praising him as the best Papa Sussex ever. A title that Paula quite hilariously noted sounds a bit too much like Papa Smurf for a grown prince, while the children's faces were, as always, carefully hidden from view. Then Princess Catherine released a beautiful, seemingly impromptu photograph of William being hugged by Princess Charlotte, an image taken after trooping the color that successfully balanced his grand public duty as future king with his private reality as a loving dad. Yet, despite this flurry of public tributes, the 2 central, most controversial fathers in this entire royal drama remained entirely absent from the celebratory narratives. King Charles received no public Father's Day wishes from his youngest son, and Meghan's father, Thomas Markle, was once again completely ignored. The ongoing, absolute freeze between Meghan and her father remains one of the most stark examples of the cold-heartedness that critics often point to when evaluating her public brand of universal kindness and compassion. Thomas Markle, who paid for his daughter's private education, funded her university tuition at Northwestern, and even continued paying off her student loans long after she graduated, is now an elderly man in fragile health, having suffered a stroke and lost a leg. Yet Meghan stubbornly refuses to speak to him or offer any financial support. Her complete excommunication of him began when he embarrassed her by staging paparazzi photographs in Mexico prior to the royal wedding, a misstep for which she apparently deemed him permanently unforgivable, ensuring he has never met his grandchildren. Archie and Lilibet. This harsh reality stands in sharp contrast to the carefully managed image of familial bliss and protective privacy that the Sussexes continuously attempt to project through their highly controlled social media presence and commercial ventures. Their ongoing choice to hide their children's faces in every single public photographs has created what marketing experts call a curiosity gap, deliberately building up a sense of intense mysteries and commercial value around the children's appearances. This strategy is the exact opposite of the approach taken by the Prince and Princess of Wales, who made a conscious decision from the very beginning to regularly release high-quality, clear photographs of George, Charlotte, and Louis to the public by ensuring that the world knows exactly what their children look like through official, beautiful photographs. William and Catherine effectively destroyed the commercial market for illegal, invasive paparazzi pictures, protecting their children's daily lives by removing the financial incentive for photographers to stalk them. The Sussexes, conversely, have backed themselves into a difficult corner with this endless hiding of profiles, because it is an unsustainable strategy for public figures whose entire commercial viability relies on their personal brand. There is a school of thought suggesting that Archie and Lilibet might finally be shown fully to the world during this upcoming trip to the United Kingdom, as Meghan prepares to pivot toward a more family-friendly Earth Mother-style brand, knowing that under corporate tax laws, she has about 2 more years to turn a profit before her recent business ventures can no longer utilize massive loss write-offs. However, a public reveal of the children's faces during a trip to the UK would immediately open the Sussexes up to intense accusations of extreme cynicism, using their own children as a public relations shield to restore their tarnished credibility. The only way we are likely to see an official photograph of the children during this visit is if King Charles agrees to a formal, joint photograph with his grandchildren, a possibility that is currently the subject of intense, conflicting media reports. Some publications claim the king will be far too busy with his official schedule and health treatments to meet with the Sussexes, while others insist he will absolutely insist on seeing his grandchildren. Despite the palace's acute awareness that any such image would be heavily commodified and used by Meghan to market her various lifestyle brands, the stakes are incredibly high, as the palace is fully aware that allowing a photograph could be interpreted as the king validating the merchandising of the monarchy, potentially giving Meghan a powerful new aesthetic to exploit for her commercial endeavors. As Paula and I concluded over our discussion, the king finds himself caught in an incredibly difficult position, balancing his natural, emotional desires as a grandfather with his heavy institutional responsibilities as the protector of the crown. A tension that sets the stage perfectly for our deep dive with our royal insider. This delicate balance of familial emotion and institutional survival brings us to the most critical aspect of this entire royal drama, a reality that the celebrated biographer Tom Bower explores with devastating precision. When we examine the true motivations behind this reported return to the United Kingdom, the situation can be summarized quite succinctly in just 2 words: desperation and failure. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex appear to have hit a significant headwind in their post-royal career, running completely out of viable creative ideas and finding themselves increasingly frozen out by major global streaming platforms like Netflix and Spotify. With their long-term financial stability facing genuine jeopardy, the reality of their independence has proven far more challenging than they ever anticipated, leading to a profound shift in their strategic approach to the royal family. For Meghan, the drive has always been centered around an intense desire for international fame, substantial wealth, and the elevated social status that only a direct association with the British crown can truly provide. It seems increasingly clear to her that a high-profile visit to the royal family conducted under the watchful eye of the global media is the quickest way to restore the international credibility and commercial value she has steadily lost since stepping away from royal duties. For Harry, the situation is arguably far more complex and emotionally fraught, as he finds himself increasingly isolated within the cultural bubble of California, entirely devoid of the structured public role that once gave his life a sense of purpose. He deeply misses his family, his military connections, and his roots in England, and he is now attempting to worm his way back into the affections of both his father and the British public, effectively crawling back on bended knees to the very institution he so publicly dismantled in his autobiography. Spare this potential return places King Charles in an extraordinarily difficult position, particularly given that Harry previously demanded a full public apology from the royal family for their alleged mistreatment of Meghan before he would even consider stepping foot on British soil again. No such apology has been offered, nor will it ever be, meaning that any return by the Sussexes represents a significant capitulation to the terms dictated entirely by Buckingham Palace, rather than the half-in, half-out royal status they originally fought so hard to establish. Furthermore, the timing of this visit is fraught with legal and reputational danger, as the royal family anxiously awaits a crucial high court judgment in Harry's ongoing litigation against Associated Newspapers. There is a widespread belief among legal experts that Harry's personal reputation is set to take a heavy beating in this forthcoming judgment, due to inconsistencies in his testimony regarding his historical relationship with a well-known journalist, a factor that could cause immense public embarrassment to the monarchy if he is actively residing in a royal palace when the ruling is handed down. The decision to offer them accommodation within a royal palace has left a vast section of the British public entirely aghast, viewed by many as an unwarranted reward for what can only be described as a historic, deeply calculated betrayal of the crown. Through their explosive Netflix docuseries and numerous high-profile interviews, Harry and Meghan did not merely accuse individual family members of bias. They actively facilitated a narrative that condemned the late Queen Elizabeth II, the institution of the monarchy, and the entire British Commonwealth. To see this behavior, seemingly condoned by the king, is a bitter pill for many to swallow, especially when one considers the immense psychological damage their public campaigns inflicted upon the Prince and Princess of Wales. William and Catherine have borne the brunt of the Sussexes' most venomous public allegations, and the idea of the king granting a platform to individuals who have proven themselves entirely untrustworthy is seen by the Wales household as a profound slap in the face to their own unswerving loyalty and public duty. To understand why King Charles is willing to tolerate such a profound risk, one must look closely at his own complex history, a trajectory beautifully documented in Tom Bower's previous work, Rebel King. Charles has historically been a highly conflicted, deeply insecure, and at times headstrong individual who famously defied public opinion and the advice of his closest advisors to achieve his ultimate personal goal, the complete public rehabilitation and coronation of Queen Camilla. Having successfully masterminded that decades-long media campaign against seemingly impossible odds, Charles may well harbor a sense of defiance, believing that he can apply those same dark arts of media manipulation to quietly bring Harry back into the fold. However, the fundamental difference that Charles appears to overlook is that his campaign for Camilla was driven by a deep, lifelong romantic passion that ultimately brought him personal stability, whereas his relationship with Harry is defined by a history of emotional negligence and subsequent systemic betrayal. The political and institutional fallout of allowing the Sussexes to rehabilitate their image on British soil poses a direct threat to the long-term survival of the monarchy, particularly at a time when recent polling indicates that public support for the institution has declined significantly, dropping from 65% to just 55% over the past 3 years. This worrying decline aligns perfectly with the beginning of King Charles's reign and his widely criticized handling of the Prince Andrew scandal, where his repeated attempts to privately rehabilitate his disgraced brother caused immense reputational damage to the crown. Repeating this exact same mistake with Harry and Meghan, by allowing them to utilize a royal palace as a backdrop for their commercial endeavors, could alienate the monarchy's most loyal supporters and create an irreparable rift between the king and his heir, Prince William, whose stance against his brother remains entirely steadfast. As the Sussexes prepare to arrive in the United Kingdom for the upcoming rehearsals of the Invictus Games in Birmingham, the palace will be forced to draw an incredibly firm line in the sand regarding how this visit is presented to the world. The Invictus Games, an initiative originally founded to honor and support wounded veterans, have increasingly evolved into what critics describe as the Meghan Markle show, a highly publicized wardrobe showcase where the focus shifts entirely away from the competing soldiers and onto the Duchess's commercial fashion choices. The palace must ensure that Harry and Meghan are strictly prohibited from parading themselves as official representatives of the royal family during their time in Britain, denying them the valuable photographic opportunities and royal imagery they so desperately require to sustain their commercial survival in America. Ultimately, this unfolding saga is far more than a simple family grievance. It is a profound battle for the very soul and dignity of the British monarchy. An institution that cannot afford to compromise its core values for the sake of temporary sentimental appeasement. If King Charles permits his youngest son and daughter-in-law to exploit their royal titles for personal and financial gain without offering a genuine public apology to the British people and the family they so deeply wronged, he risks undermining the very foundations of duty and service that his mother spent 70 years protecting. As this extraordinary week draws to a close, the eyes of the world remain fixed on Buckingham Palace, waiting to see whether the king will stand firm in defense of the crown or bow to the relentless, calculated ambitions of the House of Sussex. And we will be right here to bring you every update as this historic confrontation reaches its inevitable climax.